My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today we're going to talk about 3 reasons why blocking and rising above your needs will not work forever. And therefore, at some point, we're going to have to handle and resolve our inner conflicts. So as a very quick review, so we can tie all of this in together today, because this is part 3. So the first 2 parts included, number 1, how we block our unmet needs. And we do this by turning against ourselves, turning against other people, or we provoke or we pick partners to treat us in the same abusive and neglectful ways that we experienced in our childhoods. And then we talked about rising above our unmet needs. And we do this by moving towards people, moving against people, and moving away from people. One of the questions that is very important to ask is, can we gravitate to more than one way to rise above our needs? Again, so we're looking at the 3 ways that we rise above our needs. Do we choose one unconsciously, or can we have like a hybrid version, or can we vacillate back and forth between all 3? So the answer to this is yes, we can gravitate to more than one way to rise above our needs. And this is because not every trauma is the same. Therefore, our trauma responses may be different. Now, this becomes a very interesting part of psychology, because if you look at most therapists, and I would say almost all YouTubers that are trying to deal with this type of thing, what they'll say is that they talk about personality disorders. In a personality disorder, we're talking about being permanent, being pervasive. And what you can do is you can reliably predict somebody's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors over a long period of time in all different situations and contexts. So everything remains basically the same. Therefore, you hear somebody say, this is a narcissist. Now, I've been to some conferences where I've actually argued with some people about this point, because there's a lot of people out there that believe that you're basically born a narcissist. You can see it in the brain, therefore there's nothing to change, and that's the way they are. Or something happens in their childhood, they become a narcissist, therefore, let's say narcissistic personality disorder, and nothing can be done to change that. Well, as you're doing your own conceptualization throughout this show, think about the question for you. Can you gravitate between more than one way to rise above your needs? And if you're saying yes, then that would indicate that you might be a person that doesn't necessarily believe in what all these other YouTubers are saying. Because you can vacillate back and forth, because what you're trying to do, and it starts at a very young age, you're trying to decrease your anxiety, and you're trying to give yourself some type of power and validation. And there's a lot of ways to do that. What Karen Horney would say, and she is the one that came up with most of the material on moving toward, moving against, and moving away. She would say that those are called neurotic trends. In other words, not a personality disorder, but certain trends that people unconsciously choose under different situations to get what they want. Now, there was an interesting comment made this week, and I really want to answer to it. So somebody said that rising above their needs is extremely difficult. And I absolutely agree. That's true. However, what's even more difficult is trying to look underneath those are rising above our needs and trying to figure out what those unmet needs are and maybe what we're actually looking for. So that is really where the gold is. That is where the hard work actually lies. And another comment was somebody said that they're very angry and they're going to be angry forever. So I'd like to address that as well, because I think we all have that. If we have unmet needs in our childhood, we're all angry. So we can all admit that that's what happens. But On the good side, anger is not a standalone emotion. Anger tends to be an emotion that is very much of a bully. It's a bodyguard. And what it's doing is it's sequestering you off from the deeper emotions and feelings that are actually harder to access or more shame inducing. So that's where the work is. We have to look at that. And that's really where we're going to get our healing from. So what I would like to do today, if I can, I was going to use an example of how to look at anger and how to try to look at what our rising above needs are. But I couldn't come up with a good example because I was making stuff up. So I'm going to use the work that I've done on myself. So I'm going to draw a little bit of emotional blood here, and I'm going to try to encompass all of this in order to help other people so they can do it for themselves. So I'm going to take it right from the beginning. What needs with me may have been unmet. So let's take it from, I was about 4 years old, 5 years old, and I remember very, very clearly on that day, my father and my mother at that time were married, and my father was trying to walk out of the house, and I didn't want him to leave. And I said, no, you need to stay. And he said, I have to leave. And I said, when are you going to be back? And he said, I might not be back. And it was interesting because I do remember him hugging me, and he held me for a long time. So I held him too for a long time. And my dad was one of those really tough, old school Sicilian guys that has like no emotion. And it was almost scary to me that he was crying. And I just kept holding on to him. And he said, I have to go. And then when he went to leave again, I was a little kid, obviously, I was like 5. I grabbed around his leg. And, you know, he was an adult man. So he was able to walk with me still on his leg to get to the door. And at the end, he pushed me off of him, and he walked out the door. And at that moment, that was the last time I actually had a full family. I remember it very clearly. He never came back to the house, and my parents were never married. And that was the end of the family, so to speak. So what was the unmet childhood need? What was the narcissistic wound from that? And the work that I've done on it leads me to believe that I have an extreme fear of abandonment, and I have an extreme fear of rejection. So rejection and abandonment wound. Now, just like a lot of other people out there, I became extremely angry. What was I angry at? At the time, I didn't know, but I had to do a lot of work on it. But in terms of how I rose above my unmet need, I became one of those moving against people. I became very angry, very combative. My father was a relatively violent guy at the time towards my mother. And so in order to protect my mother, I also wanted to become big and strong. Number 1, to protect my mom. Number 2, to protect myself. And number 3, in a very strange way, I wanted to be able to impress my father, because he was all about it when I was being aggressive. That turned me into a kid that got into a lot of trouble in school because I used to beat people up all the time, and I ended up getting in trouble when one of the teachers looked at my notebook and they saw that I had a list of names of other boys in the school, and I had I had their names crossed off as I was going into school and beating them up. So I basically had a hit list. It went from there for me to be as aggressive and as competitive as possible in sports and actually in academics too. So I wanted to be the smartest guy. I wanted to be the best athlete. I wanted to be the most aggressive and powerful person in the room all the time. So that's one part of it, moving against. Now, on the other part, my mother. I saw my mother cry all the time. I wanted to soothe her. I wanted to be perfect for her, so I moved into perfectionism. I wanted to have my mom have something to be proud about. And so I became extremely, let's say, submissive in a lot of ways, especially when it came towards women. I wanted to be a valuable helper. What were my needs then that were unmet? And I would say because we were poor, because we had difficulty with food sometimes, because we did get evicted or we were riding on eviction all the time, the needs that I had that weren't getting met were for safety and security. So I have safety and security narcissistic wounds as well. And I ended up moving toward people, and I became very good at moving toward people and managing my mother's emotions and trying to make her happy under the worst of circumstances. So this becomes really interesting because if you believe in personality disorders, you don't believe anything I just said. And I know if you're listening to me right out there and you're saying, I can vacillate between different types of ways of rising above needs too. Well, then that might indicate to you that you're on looking at the side that Karen Horney said, is that there might not actually be personality disorders in the way that they're conceptualized today. For example, what I just described to you was a narcissist to the core. However, I'm also incredibly empathic. So how could you be a narcissistic empath? A person who only believes in personality disorders is going to have a heck of a time trying to explain that because it's not explainable, not through their conceptualization. But if you believe in neurotic trends and living things do the best they can to lower their anxiety depending on their situations, and it can change in certain situations, then you'll understand what I'm saying. So let's move to the other part of the show. I want to talk about 3 reasons why blocking and rising above needs, it eventually fails. It's not a good long-term solution, and eventually we're going to have to look at the inner core wounds that I just showed you. And again, just so I can, if you want to be a leader, I think you have to go first, and that's what I did. So my wounds, rejection, abandonment, safety, security. I rose above those by being as much of an athlete as I can, to be competitive, to win, to be as smart as I can, and to also get along with people as much as I can. So all of those, put them together. So the number one reason why rising above needs is not going to fully work forever, it's called the tyranny of the shoulds. You could also call it musts. Now, again, this was coined by Karen Horney, who I believe is the greatest therapist who ever lived. And here's the definition of tyranny of the shoulds. We're going to go over this. It's extremely important. Definition: unrelenting, unforgiving, unrealistic, neurotic, compulsive, self-imposed demands on the individual to be perfect. I know, it's a mouthful, right? So let's go over it a little bit. Unrelenting. It just doesn't stop. It's this thing that drives you to keep doing it. It's unrealistic. Why? Because you can't be perfect all the time. It's neurotic. Why? Well, by definition, a person who's neurotic tends to live in a lot of high anxiety. They tend to be very negative, and they tend to have a lot of self-doubt. So you're going to do things to try to erase all those. So it's definitely neurotic. Compulsive. Again, it's an unconscious urge or drive. It's not like somebody wakes up and says, you know, what I really like to do is this, or I choose to do that. No, it's more of a compulsive drive that you have to do it. You feel like you have no control. Again, self-imposed, because it's a way to try to rise above our needs, and we're choosing this. Again, it's a compromise solution, not the best, but it's the best we can do. And it's a demand. Again, it's a demand on the self. It's not a suggestion. It's not a light tap on the shoulder saying, hey, would you consider doing this? No, it's a demand for you to do this so you can feel like you're a decent person. And it's a demand on the individual to be perfect, which in turn to lower your anxiety and give yourself some validation. So here are some familiar things that you might hear from a person when they're fed up with their tyranny of the shoulds. You'll hear, I can't do this anymore. I can't be the perfect parent. I can't be the perfect spouse. I can't be the perfect professional. I need a day off. I can't be the perfect lover all the time. I'm sick and tired of being everything to everybody. And you'll hear the words, give me a break. Like, I thought about this too, because, the other day I woke up, it was like 3:30 in the morning. I'm like, oh God, give me a break. And I thought, who am I talking to? Give me a break. I'm literally talking to myself. I'm the one doing it. It's a self-imposed demand on me. Because if I slept in, I would feel like a loser. Nobody's doing it other than me. So when you say, screw this, give me a break, it's not somebody else, it's you. It's the tyranny of the should. You're putting this on yourself. So again, the term should or must, you'll hear things like this. You should be able to endure everything. You should be able to take as much pain as possible to get the job done. You should be able to understand everything. You must be the most intelligent person in the room if you expect to make some money. You should like everybody. You need to always be productive. Productive people don't sleep that much. Don't sleep more than 6 hours. You should always forgive if you're a good person. You must never hurt other people's feelings, even if they hurt yours. You must always put other people first. You should never show weakness. And don't you dare ever run out of willpower. The tyranny of the shoulds. You can't keep this up forever. It's impossible. However, what happens when you don't live up to your shoulds and your musts? As a quick aside, I think it was Albert Ellis that tried to take Karen Horney's work and he tried to jazz it up a little bit. He used to say, don't should on yourself, which I think is kind of funny. And he used to say, with the word must, he said, don't masturbate. Because it's all about you. Nobody cares that you live up to all these things. You're putting it on yourself. Tyranny of the shoulds. Karen Horney has a great, it's like a 12 or 13 page dissertation on tyranny of the shoulds. I'm going to break it down to 2 words. If you don't live up to your own self-imposed tyranny of the shoulds, it increases your self-hate. There you go, 13 pages broken down to 2 words. Now, I've been in the bodybuilding world most of my life. I have a lot of bodybuilding friends, bodybuilding champions, figure champions, bikini champions, athletes, star athletes. And it's amazing. I can tell you something else. I live in Las Vegas. When you have a pool and you invite all these types of people to a pool party in the summer when it's 110 degrees out, it's not what you think it is. It's not like you're going to get all these beautiful people hanging around with no clothes on. It doesn't work like that. Most of the people I know that are like that, they don't want to show up in public to a pool unless they're in top physical shape. A lot of people that I know that are bodybuilding champions, if they're not in competition at their competition weight, they're 20 to 30 pounds over, they'll show up at your party because they want to be friends with you and be nice. But they're going to show up in a long sleeve shirt. They're not going to go in the pool. So it's not what you think. Why? Because there's a lot of self-hate underneath that. If you want to look at people who are the most neurotic and have the most issues and the most self-hate, look at the top tier of people. Because there's a reason why they're pushing so hard all the time and they just don't give themselves a break. I know people, and it's very unfortunate, very sad. They look amazing. Some of them best athletes in the world. Awesome. When they take showers in the dark. They try to dim the lights as much as possible. They don't want to see their own body. They don't want to wake up in the morning and have to be faced with the fact that they're not perfect, which is really interesting because when you're in the bodybuilding world, most of them shave. Men and women, I'm talking about, right? Like guys shave their legs. Here's the thing, they wake up in the morning, super tired, facing the day with a razor, and they're gonna do it in the dark. Because if they're shaving their legs and they don't see enough veins in their legs, they think they're fat. So they don't want to start off the day like that. It's amazing, right? Tyranny of the shoulds. You can't live like that forever. You're not going to be happy. You have to somehow learn to love yourself unconditionally. So let's talk about number 2, the second reason why blocking and rising above unmet needs will fail. It's because when we do all these things, we do have a sense of entitlement. We think that we're special, and we are. It's our self-esteem, it's our identity, it's how we get validated. But not everybody agrees, right? So it takes us back to step 1. So having a sense of entitlement and feeling special due to living up to many of your shoulds, it doesn't work all the time. And it doesn't matter if you're a saint, it doesn't matter if you're rich, it doesn't matter if you're the most attractive person all the time. You can't impress everybody. It's just the way it is. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's easier to attract people when you're not so good. You know, the term dad bod comes to mind, right? Like, a lot of people like to be around someone who's average. It just kind of makes them feel better about themselves. So I would imagine they have a richer source of people to choose from in their life when they're more average. Right? Nobody wants to necessarily be with someone who's in the gym 7 days a week, 3 hours a day, right? Like people like more towards the average. So moving toward people as a way to rise above needs, you cannot and you will not win the love and approval of everyone you want. And I know moving towards people, they like to keep pushing and pushing and pushing because they do need that connection, because they're addicted to the relationship and holding it together, such as somebody like me, right? Like when my father walks out, so you become addicted to try to holding people because you never see them want to walk out that door again, right? So again, rejection and abandonment wounds. But here's the thing. If you have that type of mentality to try to win everybody's love and approval, even when they're not healthy and they're hurting you, you're going to put yourself up for absolute abuse. And that's a fact. You will get yourself abused if you don't learn to deal with the fact that not everybody is winnable. That's not something you want to win. You want them to come to you. You want to invest in people who are willing to invest in you. Moving against people, I'm also that. There's an issue with that. You're not always going to succeed. Not everybody's always going to fall in line with you and think you're great. You're not going to win all the time. And people will not always agree with making you the leader or thinking you're the best. There's just as many people who are going to dislike you for what you are and who you are and what you do. So that's not a winning way to do anything either. Moving away people. Life gets in the way. You're going to need people. You're going to need to trust people. You're going to need to depend on somebody somewhere. And you're going to be criticized. That's the way people are. And we live in a capitalistic society, so guess what? You're going to live in competition. That's just the way it is. You want a job, you're going to have to fight for somebody for that job. You want to work for yourself and be somewhere, that's great. If somebody else is doing what you're doing, they're going to fight for the customers too, right? So you can't just live on an island anymore. The world just doesn't work like that. So these ways of rising above needs, it's not going to fully work. Not going to fully work. We have to remember, we're not just our ability to achieve. We're not just our ability to make people love us. We're not just our ability to be superior. We need to learn how to love ourselves unconditionally and not to put these shoulds on us and not to have this way out achievements. And if we don't do those, somehow we're not lovable. If you don't address your original unmet needs, your entire sense of self is going to be in jeopardy, or could be in jeopardy, over the smallest of things in your life. I'll give you some examples. I've been around this so much in my life. You ever see a person who is angry and begins to hate themselves just because they gain 2 to 3 pounds over a weekend? You ever see somebody start to lose it just because they notice that they're losing a little bit more of their hair? There's a couple of extra hairs in the drain. I have. How about the person who gets an A- in class when they were shooting for an A+? That could ruin their whole day. It could ruin their whole life. If you want a 4.0 grade point average and you end up getting a 3.96, and then you have to look at that number for the rest of your life, that could be really annoying to a lot of people. What if your partner doesn't have an orgasm? What does that say about you? What do you think it says about you? What if you don't have an orgasm? What if you can't perform at all? Does that mean your whole identity and self-esteem is in jeopardy now? What if you go out on a limb and have a lot of courage and you reach out by telling somebody a joke or a few people a joke and nobody laughs? Does it harm your self-esteem that much? It could. I've seen it. So here's the third reason why blocking and rising above unmet needs will fail. It's because blocking and rising above the original conflict is an attempt to avoid the actual issue. It's an attempt to manage the issue. It's an attempt to lower your anxiety. But it does absolutely nothing to resolve the issue. And that is really what we need to do. And you can see this with a lot of people, because what happens is they have incredible achievements, right? And they get better and better and better, or they get more and more money, more and more popular, more and more fame, more and more security. And it's taking them further and further away because they realize it's not helping inside. It's still increasing their self-doubt. It's increasing their depression, their emptiness, suicidal ideations. And sometimes they follow through, unfortunately. And it's because they're using things to soothe themselves that really are not what they need to soothe themselves. So all the money in the world, all the fame in the world, all of these things it's actually making it harder for them, because they would think that those types of things would help them, and it's not. Some names that come to mind, I mean, somebody like Kurt Cobain, right? He killed himself, a famous musician. The more famous he got, the more of a fraud and an imposter he felt. George Michael had huge fame and fortune, amazingly talented. I think he killed himself with drugs. Like, you know, he the more people would go to see his concert, the more he was like, why do you even like me, right? So it created this dynamic that was even worse. He probably would have been better off if he had a more of a menial type of job, actually. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I saw the Elvis Presley movie, and there's another one. Here's another guy that didn't seem to have any happiness whatsoever, and he had everything in this world to be happy about. But he had a horrible relationship, really dysfunctional relationship with his mother. And it started from there. He had a whole bunch of unmet childhood needs that were never going to be filled because he sold another record or he did another show. That's not what he was looking for. And so, unfortunately, I think he died of an overdose or whatever by the time he was only like 42 years old. It's like really, really sad. So I think I did an okay job today of conceptualizing the things that I wanted to talk about today. Again, the 3 reasons why blocking and rising above needs will not work forever. And we need to understand that before we get to the other part, because it's such a big part of our identity, a big part of our self-esteem, that there's no way that we're even going to think about getting rid of that and start to look at our inner wounds. We're not going to do that if we don't understand about how difficult it is to keep on this facade and that it doesn't work. So we really need to look at that first before we start inching away from that to get to our core needs. So I think it's some new shows coming up. I'm not sure, I don't have anything written yet, but I was thinking about going back over and talking about the neurotic trends that I mentioned today. And I have a bunch of questions so we can determine which defense mechanism is one that you may or may not be leaning on. I also want to do a show about how to start dropping the defense mechanisms and how to address the core issues. So those are some things I'd like to do, and if there's any more questions, if people want to ask, more than willing to address those in these shows. So my name is Joe Peroni, this is the Rise Above Project, and hopefully that was valuable. Thank you.